Good morning, Boker Tov. Welcome again. We're on to a new parsha, and before I forget, which I may have done the last time around, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech HaOlam Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And here we go. Parshat va'Eyra, the second parsha in Exodus, in the book of Shemot. And there are puzzles that go right off the bat and really some really beautiful stuff that comes out of this. So one thing you have to know is how the preceding parsha ended, how the parsha of Exodus ended. Just to summarize a little bit what happened. So you know that Moses resists being sent by God to go speak to Pharaoh and the Israelites, but he ultimately does go and do it, all right? And when he speaks to Pharaoh the first time and says, thus says the God of Israel, blah, 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 Pharaoh says to advisors, well, we have to punish them. Pharaoh tries to use political strategy by trying to make Moses odious in the eyes of the Israelites. And as a result of Moses going to him, he basically tells the taskmasters that from now on, the straw that was supplied to the Israelites for making the bricks, they're going to have to go and collect it themselves. In other words, trying to make their work almost twice as hard so that they'll criticize Moses for having gone and spoken to him. Not the last time such a strategy was ever done, right? Retaliatory strategy. And when the Israelites get this, basically the Israelite officers are beaten for not performing enough, not creating enough bricks, because they have to put the same number of bricks they made as before, but now the Israelites have to collect straw as well. So they complain to Moses, and then Moses turns to God and he says, why are you doing this? You sent me and now things are worse. And the parsha ends on a positive note saying, that God says, no, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. But we pick this idea up again, and you can see that we're starting with verse bet, with the second verse. And this is important, that Moses complains to God about doing this. Va'daber Elohim el Moshe. Now, in reading this, something should jump out at you right away. I'll finish the sentence, okay? But I want you to focus on those first 3 or 4 words and tell me what jumps out at you. Vayomer elav ani Adonai. And he said to him, I am Hashem. What jumps out at you?
That it says va'Eyra instead of Vayomer.
Okay, that's one thing. Something even.
And I know it says it later, but usually it says Vayomer.
That's right.
And ad Hashem el Moshe lemor.
Okay, but notice it doesn't say Ad Hashem. That's
right.
It says Elohim. It says Elohim. It's just wow. Va'daber Elohim. And then not only that, I mean the puzzle of the sentence. Vayomer elav ani Adonai. And he says to him, I am Adonai. How do we make sense out of this sentence? Excuse me, I don't know if it just got very large for you. So Rashi is going to explain to us. This is a code. Now, there's a very, very profound point, drush, on the names of God. And the name Hashem is Adonai, Adonai El Rachum V'Chanun. The word Hashem connotes love, rachamim. And the word Elohim is actually also a word that is used in a non-religious, non-holy sense to mean judges. And there's this understanding of this sort of relationship of justice on the one hand and mercy on the other hand, that there are 2 poles. And so this is going to connote that God is speaking to Moses in a judgmental kind of way, okay? That he is actually correcting Moses. And as you mentioned, Lauren, the word va'daber, which is not that uncommon, has a harsh association with it. And we can translate vayomer as said and vaidaber as spoke. And in fact, there is a verse back in Genesis where the brothers are coming back to Jacob and saying, the man spoke to us harshly. So there is a harsh quality when it says vaidaber. And then, of course, what is meant by saying Ani Hashem? Didn't Moses know this? So there's some lovely stuff that goes along with this that I hope you will enjoy very, very much. Vaidaber Elohim el Moshe. Diber ito mishpat. He spoke to him in a judgmental way. Al shehiksha, in that he challenged him. Ledaber, to speak, velomar, and to say, lama hare ota la'am hazeh. Moses, in the previous verse, or the two verses away, says, why have you done evil to this people? In other words, because now Pharaoh is worse. He's acting in a worse way. So this was Moses challenging God. And there's another reason why this was inappropriate. It was not sufficiently respectful, because God actually tells Moses ahead of time that Pharaoh is not going to send them, that he is going to go and speak to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh is not going to listen until he is sufficiently corrected, until he finally basically wants to drive them out. We are talking about stubbornness. Vayomer elav ani Hashem. So then what's this got to do with it, right? And he said to him, I am Hashem. This is a very important principle that's going to come out now. That when we have the statement Ani Hashem at the end of a statement, Ne'eman l'shalmeim sachar tov la'mithalchim lefainai. I can be trusted to give good reward to those who walk before me. Velo lechinam shelachticha, and I didn't send you for no purpose. Ki im lekayem dvarai, but to actually establish my words, shedibarti la'avot, that I spoke to the patriarchs harishonim, those early patriarchs. Uvelashon hazeh, and this kind of language, matzinu, we find this kind of language, shehu nidrash bechama makomot, which can be interpreted in several places, ani Hashem, when it says, I am Hashem, ne'eman li para, not only to can be trusted to reward good behavior, but to hold accountable, okay, someone who, in other words, to punish. Keshehu omer etzel onesh, when it is stated next to a punishment. When it's a punishment, and then it says Ani Hashem. Kagon, for example, guess what? Rashi doesn't just make categorical statements. He likes to prove what he's saying. Kagon, for example, V'chilalta et Shem Elohecha Ani Hashem, and you profane the name of your God, I am Hashem. So, in other words, I am Hashem. You can count on me that you're not going to get away with this.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think it's saying you can count on me that you're not going to get away with it, but you can also count on me that I will do this fairly and with mercy.
Of course, yes, that's true.
That, that,
Yes, that's nice. Good. Yeah.
yeah.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an interesting element, because the Hashem, we're taught to think of as connected to mercy.
Yes.
But in this context, it seems to be used as like, I am the righteous judge. I reward, I punish, and I'm faithful in my rewarding and punishing.
Right. But I love what Lauren has said, because I think it is so important to understand that God's judgments are loving acts. And I think what Lauren is bringing out is that we need, when we say Shema Yisrael, it's taken me decades to sort of start to figure this out. But Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem, right? So to understand that essentially creation itself is a loving act of the divine creator. And that this world that we live in, we accept, when it says Eloheinu, our God, that we are accepting God as our judge. That we
And I think,
accept, okay? And then another Hashem, to understand that the adversity that we understand is there to teach us lessons, okay, is actually also a loving act of God, perhaps the ultimate loving act. And so I love how it doesn't say Ani Elohim, it says Ani Hashem. Go
but
ahead.
also I think that righteousness includes love and mercy. I think without love and mercy, then punishment is not righteous punishment.
Right.
It's, it's angry punishment, and maybe God is angry, but angry in the context of a loving relationship is a different kind of punitiveness.
True.
It's
Yeah.
retaliation.
No, that's very true.
I have a question, being a beginner
Go ahead.
question. I noticed Eloheinu and Elokeinu. I'm not sure what.
Good question. Thank you.
Yeah.
No, it's a great question. I'm so glad you asked that. Okay. So it's a way that we have of trying, okay, respect implies distance. And so it's a way of saying that the name of God is so special that we, when we're not using it in a holy context such as prayer, if we're just talking about it, there's a distinction of using God's name in prayer as opposed to simply discussing theological statements. So when we're reading Torah to the congregation as a holy act, you say Elohim. But if we're just talking about theological ideas, such as now, we would use the term Elokim. And that is sort of another measure of distance in terms of showing deep respect for God.
It's like saying Hashem or Adoshem
Correct.
rather than Adonai. You're switching the
Right.
word that you're using because you're not using it as a prayer.
Right.
So when I recorded who Eloheinu, was that correct to record it that way, or should have been
That's
who
a
Eloheinu?
great question. So very often, if you get records that are done by Orthodox sources, they will record it Elokeinu. But I don't think, look, here intention is very important, all right? And you have to be careful because sometimes people are confused by this. So, I would say that if we lived in a world where everybody understood the nature of showing respect for God to the point of respecting God's name in that particular way, I think it would be okay to know that. And I have heard records without any question, recordings that say Elokeinu or Adoshem and do not use God's actual name. It's complicated. And the reason it's complicated is because sometimes when you do that, it makes you look sort of holy and you don't want any showing off to be going on. You know what I'm saying? You don't want to look like you're holier than thou and that sort of thing. So you want to be very careful about how you apply these things. But it's great that you asked the question, Lisa, and the follow-up question was a fantastic question. And one has, as I've sort of tried to enter this particular world, and I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and recognized that it's not a linear kind of thing. You have to take into account a lot of different factors, and so if I'm studying myself and I'm, say, practicing the Torah portion, then I will try to remember to say Adoshem and Elokim. But if I'm teaching, I'm not always consistent about it.
I was taught by my Orthodox Hebrew school teachers to write out G-D, which is interesting because it's different than whether you're using the words Adonai and Eloheinu, and some people say, well, when you're just using them intellectually, you should change it. But you're right, depending on the audience. But for G-D, that is not an official Jewish name of God. It is, but you are referring to God. So there's like different schools of thought about whether you need to write G-D. And did it for years and years and years, but at this point I kind of like don't always do it. And
Okay,
maybe sometimes I'll do it, but similarly thinking about who I'm writing for.
let me respond to that, Lauren. I actually have done some research on that.
Okay.
And for precisely the reasons that you're stating. I mean, you're thinking along absolutely the correct lines. And there are only certain names for God that are considered holy. And translations of these names do not have that intrinsic holiness that words like Elohim or Adoshem have. And so I never put G-D, because in some ways going to the opposite extreme is attributing and implying a level of holiness that those words don't have. So again, we're talking about degrees now. So whenever you're sort of doing shading, right? Shading is what makes a picture look real, right? It's all about shading. And it's one of the most difficult things to learn and to understand. And so as I said, if I'm writing in English, there is no need to put G-D because there is no intrinsic holiness to that name. It is something that denotes something. And of course the word itself and talking about God, the very concept is complicated. Let me make sure I finish up this Rashi. I'm so happy.
One more thing I just want to point out in the text also, you don't always see things written out, spelling out God's name, either Elohim or Adoshem or whatever they represent. You often see Yud Yud, or sometimes you see a kuf and you see Elohim or Elokay,
Right.
So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And
and
looking
even
at text.
kale becomes kale.
Yes, absolutely. You're right. And sometimes they go to the effect of saying Shakai and not Shaddai.
Oh, I haven't seen that one yet,
Yes.
but I get it.
Okay. But notice our text, by the way. Notice, right? Ani, and look
Right.
at that. Ani Hashem.
Right.
Right? So it's a matter of learning holiness, of respect, really understanding on a deeper level how you show respect, you know. So, if I refer to you as Ms. Iskin, that's a very respectful way of speaking to you. But again, remember, it implies distance. And calling you Lisa implies a certain closeness. It's interesting. All right.
Yes, thank you.
You
One
bet.
other
No, great question. Please go ahead.
one other thing that strikes me about this is um, how to show respect is cultural,
Yes.
and um, the thing I've had to specifically talk about is we show respect by wearing a yarmulke, and the thing is that when you go to a baseball game, when the national anthem is played, everybody stands up, you take off your hat, you put it across this is a way to show respect at American baseball games.
Mm-hmm.
And it is very different than putting on a hat to show respect. And for 98%, 99.9 of the kids I'm ever talking to about this, it is a question of putting it on. And when coming to Hebrew school or coming into shul, and it is not something that they do every day or they do all the time. And so I think it's important for us to not just do it and do it consciously, but we also need to share that's what we're doing, not as an instruction. Well, I guess as an instruction, but not to convince, just to define terms. And I don't think we live in a world where what respect looks like is shared, or even sometimes even addressed. Addressing it may be a new concept.
So this is a hobby horse of mine, all right? The hobby horse in the sense that, I feel one of my critiques of our culture is we're really into love. We always talk about love, 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 love. And there are other cultures that understand that you have to balance love with respect, that there are two sides of a scale. And I'm sort of underlining the point I think you're making, which is we don't discuss respect. We don't have the same respect for respect than we do for love. And that's a tragedy in some ways. The other piece too, Judith, is you're right. Some elements of respect are not cross-cultural, but there are other elements of respect that are cross-cultural. The notion that respect involves allowing for a certain amount of distance, that is part of the very nature of respect. Um, and let me just
But
say,
I don't think that it is, it, it doesn't go without saying.
right,
And particularly since we don't discuss what respect is,
yes,
or for the last, I mean, the whole take a knee debate hasn't even had given the hasn't given the motives of the kneelers respect, so that um, the well, ad hominem attacks on people's patriotism because of it, that doesn't, it's not a respectful discussion, and the form of our discussions have shown no respect.
true. That's all part of the lack of understanding of the need for respect. Let me back up a little bit. So you mentioned the bearing your head, which is a very, I know that because I grew up in South Africa and it was very influenced where I lived from England. We were very influenced by English customs, etc. That bearing your head, taking off your hat, is considered a sign of respect. And perhaps it's because of the idea of vulnerability, that bearing your head is like showing a willingness to be vulnerable, and for that reason, it is a respectful sign. From a Jewish perspective, covering your head is a sign of respect, because my best explanation of it is that by covering your head, you're showing that there is something between you and God, that God is above you. And that's why covering your head in a Jewish context is a way of covering yourself up, is considered a way of showing respect, as opposed to being bareheaded. But, one has to understand the different things have different meanings as to what meaning you give them. And so, bearing your head. I also think that, by the way, we also had I think it's a wonderful custom that that it's a very extreme way of showing respect, or a beautiful way of showing respect, by standing when somebody comes into the room that deserves your respect. And I suspect that that's true all the way around. That you're saying, I can't just stay where I'm at. I need to show that that person's presence has an effect on my being at this point. And so if a teacher walked into the room, we all stood up. It's a lovely, verbalist way of saying, I respect you. I can't
I
just go on doing what I'm doing.
I think part of the origin of removing the hat was that in the old days, and I'm talking about hundreds of years ago, various hats designated various ranks. And
Hmm.
if you're removing the hat when you meet someone, you're saying, right now, I'm not pulling rank, but we're equals, and I respect you just as much as I respect myself.
Mm. Yeah,
And, wearing a skull cap really is not a matter of rank. It's not also a thing that could hide a possible weapon. It's just,
right,
as you said, a layer. It's nothing more than a layer, more than a hat. It's a layer
right,
that, because it's just a covering. It's not really,
right.
it's a layer between you and the heavens.
What's so interesting is the deep communication that clothing is capable of providing. So, then, and I mean, if you look at I guess it's millinery, right? Hats, the whole custom of wearing hats and what they can connote. So, for example, a hat can connote a crown, right? It can connote royalty. And again, the shape of the hat and how it looks, all these kinds of things. I mean, that's why in military uniform, you have the shape of the hats you have. On the other hand, you have a dunce cap, right? Another, just the reverse. So, but I know we've gone pretty far into the field on this subject. It's an important one. Let me make sure I finish this Rashi, before we run out of time. Okay, so we know that the statement Ani Hashem is there to show the faithfulness of Hashem in giving reward or doling out punishment. Let me finish up this place. All right. Here we are. Ukeshehu omer etzel kiyum mitzvot, but when he says Ani Hashem next to the establishment of or the doing of mitzvot, of commandments, kagon, for example, ushmartem mitzvotai vasitem otam ani Adonai, right? And you shall guard my commandments and you shall perform them. I am Hashem. Ne'eman litain schar. I can be counted on to give reward. So I think just, what Rashi is teaching us here is really a very fundamental principle in terms of faith and Judaism and Torah. And so I think this is a really lovely thing that we've done. So we've got here in Torah Tamima, we have an expansion of this particular concept here. But I'm going to stop here because we've got like 2 minutes, and we'll pick this up, God willing, tomorrow. And that way, if you want to make some more comments before 8 o'clock, we can do that. Let me stop the share. Okay, so as I said, I love it when I feel we have something new to learn together. Shira Beth, how aware were you of this whole thing? It's not like this is not relatively common knowledge.
What?
The statement of Ani Hashem at the end of another statement, the point that Rashi was making about being like a seal. At this point, it's like a seal, a guarantee that God is making, that he is capable of either punishing or rewarding.
I don't remember learning it. I guess I kind of intuited it maybe.
Yes.
Because that's kind of how it sounds. But I was struck, I think today for the first time, about sealing that statement by use of the word that implies mercy.
Right, Lauren's point. Yes.
Yes, that's kind of, when you look at it, that's it deepens the whole thing. Like, it's not just I'm the boss.
No.
And what I say goes. It's a lot more than that.
Right. You can count on me. You can count on me. And we're going to push this a little bit further, as you will see when we hit the next sentence, over which much ink has been spilled. So I'm going to stop the recording and say farewell to those who are joining us on the recording. And